Hello, all you lovely people out there. Today is sponsored by Olipop, only the classic grape kind, a new kind of soda. Because Olipop has prebiotics, botanicals, and plant fiber. It's also non-GMO and supports digestive health. You should get yourself.
Who do you think you are? What podcast do you think
Olipop.
you're on? This
Dude,
is
it's
not,
so good. It's
this
literally
is not the Daniel Colborn and
It's
Caleb
the best
Bosio
one.
experience.
It's the best one. No, for real. Today we are sponsored by Sentry. Sentry, thank you so much for sponsoring the show. Sentry is, of course, a first-party partner now with Forge, Laravel Forge. So if you have to be using Laravel Forge, you should definitely be using Sentry. They are the only error tracking service that I have used for probably the last decade. And they're incredible. They're really, really good. And they have great stuff. And if you haven't used them before, you definitely should. So we'll talk about them a little bit later in the show. But before that, Michael, how's it going, dude?
I'm going well. I've got a bone to pick with you about your
yes,
sham
my
water.
sham water.
So
yes.
I was at the checkout queue the other day, and I look over to the fridge. They have the fridges next to the checkouts. They want you to buy stuff on your way out the door, and I see in there Liquid Death, and we've spoken about Liquid Death.
Yes,
in the
we
past,
have.
And I was like,
Yes,
I'm looking
murder
at
your
this
thirst.
can, murder my thirst. I'm looking at the can, and I'm like, it's $4.50 for this can. It's 500
right.
mils, which is, I don't know, 16 ounces, 20 ounces,
Sure.
whatever. And I'm looking at the can for nutritional information, like how many calories is in this thing, how many, the good stuff, because I'm counting my macros at the moment. Nothing on there. I'm like, well, whatever, I'll give it a spin. And I open the can, and it sounds like,
Nothing.
It sounds like opening a can of drink with sound. And I took a sip, and I'm like, this is just water. Like,
It's
just
water.
like straight up plain water in a can that I just paid $4.50 for. And I messaged you, I'm like, are these, they're not flavored at all? Like,
yeah,
it's
no, you
just
happen
water
to,
in a can.
Yeah, you happen to get the one that is just water. Now,
Well, it was the only one on the shelf. There was
okay,
two other
fair
spots there, but they were all out of stock. So I'm like, well, maybe there is flavored versions of this. But like, I just got water.
It's probably a bit romanticized in my brain because the story is that Laracon Nashville, I was there, and like after the normal time together, they had like the open bar in the back of the area, and didn't really feel like drinking because I had to speak the next day and all the things, and I was just like, you know what, like I'll just take some water. And they're like, oh, sorry, we don't have water. And I'm like, you don't have water? They're like, we have Liquid Death. I'm like, is that water? They're like, yeah. I'm like, oh, sure, give me that. So I had one, and it was ice cold, and it was insanely refreshing, and I was very thirsty, and I was at Laracon. I'm like, this is awesome. And so for the rest of the time I was there, everywhere I went, I was like, hey, do you guys have Liquid Death? They're like, yeah, we have Liquid Death. Like, great. So I just had a bunch of Liquid Death at Laracon. It was super fun, and I loved it. And then I got home, and I got some Liquid Death, and I made the opposite mistake. I was like, oh, I'm just going to go get some water. And no, I got one that was called Armless Palmer. And it was a lemonade and tea version. And I at first was like, oh my gosh, well, that's disgusting. Is this an old one? I'm like, oh no, it's a flavored one. And so anyway, yeah, I like the flavored one now. Now I only get Armless Palmer. Although, little side story for those of you who are in here for deep cuts, Liquid Death had to change the name of Armless Palmer because Arizona Tea apparently has that name patented, like Palmer. Like you can't use the word Palmer with a lemonade and tea mix. And so as a bit of a like smack to the face, they now call it Dead Billionaire. That's what they named it. Instead of Armless Palmer, Dead Billionaire.
Well,
it's good.
I hope the next time I'm in the shop I see these other because there was two other slots on the shelf in the fridge, but they were all sold out. So I'm like, oh, I guess I'll just try this one.
Try the Armless Palmer or the Dead Billionaire if they got the updated stock over there. And I owe you $4.50 next time I see you as an apology for not informing you that it was in fact just water.
It was cold.
It's good water.
I could have got any cold water.
I know, right? It's true. They do those like taste tests where people are like, no, Liquid Death, that's the stuff, and they're like, they give them like tap water, and like, oh, that's it, that's Liquid Death right there. Like, no, it's not. Anyway,
let's move on.
Well,
let's move on to the releases.
Let's do it. Why don't you take the first one? I usually take the first one, but this is the only one we've got. So why don't you take it?
So we'll do
We've only got one.
Laravel 11.24 was released. This article was published on the 25th of September. We have a new shorthand method for process fakes. We have a null on update method for foreign key definitions, support for retrying multiple batch IDs when retrying jobs, and more. At the time of writing, auto discovery of console commands in app console commands path was broken in 11.24 and was patched in 11.24.1. So grab that patch update if you haven't updated yet. But first up, the adding of the prepend location method to the view factory. This was from Noboru Shiruwa. Added the prepend location method to the view factory, which enables you to use the method with the view facade. So previously you'd have to do something like view get finder add location or view get finder arrow prepend location. Now you can use these methods directly and they'll proxy right through to the underlying finder method. So thank you to Noboru for that one. Gisu Nasralahi added a null on update method to the foreign key definition schema class, which indicates that updates on the referenced model should set the foreign key value to null. So previously you'd have to do something like references arrow foreign, and then the column name references the foreign name on the table name, and then you would have to do like null on. You'd have to use the default like set null or whatever it is. So now you can just call null on update the same way as you would do cascade on update or restrict on update, cascade on delete, etc. So just added another named method for that underlying functionality. At Omega Dealer contributed support for backed enums in the route can method. We spoke about this in the last episode.
Good. They're
being
so good.
able to pass backed enums directly into various different places. This is another such place. So before where you'd have to call, route post arrow can and then pass it the enum name enum member and then arrow value. Now you can just pass it the enum name and it will handle the lookup to the value method under the hood. So thank you to at Omega Dealer for that one. Next up, Laravel's garbage man, Jason McCreary, contributed 2 new result shorthand methods for the process fake results in test. The first is an example here that we've got of shorthand to set the exit code, and the second one is a shorthand for throwing an exception. So you can say process fake, and then you can pass it an array of commands or executed values that you would run. So in this case, we'd have 2 that will run php-l script.php arrow, and then you'd give it an exit code. So when this is called in your code, you'd expect it to return a 255 status code. And then the second member of this array is cat readme, and you want this one to return a runtime exception. So similar to the HTTP fake, where you can pass it, a key value array of the request and then the response, request and response. This is the same kind of approach except for faking of processes. There is an example of the fake in action, which we will have a link to in the show notes. And the last item that we have here, Sean Kegel updated the query retry batch command to accept multiple IDs so that multiple jobs can be retried at once. So you can say PHP artisan q : retry -batch and then pass it multiple IDs to be retried. So thank you to Sean, and that is it for this release. We'll have links to the diff, the changelog, and everything else. Once again, we've covered the highlights, but there are literally dozens of changes and updates and patches and fixes and whatever else in this release. So links to all of that will be in the show notes.
Indeed. Jason McCreary on the whole process fake thing. I think he originally wrote his implementation of Laravel Shift using Symfony's process component. And then once Laravel came out with theirs, it was just like, should I redo it? I don't really think I'm going to. And then he recently committed to it. And I believe he's been live streaming the process as well. The process of switching to process for Laravel. Okay. Yes, indeed. And so, if you're interested in any of that and what this is, what this process thing all is, it basically hooks into the underlying calls to the command line, and you can fake them now, which is pretty cool. So interesting stuff. And since he's working on it, he figured, I'm going to Boy Scout this code, leave it better than I found it. I'm going to add some new fakes here, and he has done just that. Thank you, Jason McCreary. Beautiful. So on with the releases. PHP 8.4 release candidate 1 is here. This is pretty cool. We've got in herd now you actually have the ability to pull down PHP 8.4 into Herd, and so you can start using it locally if you want, if you'd like. Well, the PHP team has announced the release of the PHP 8.4 release candidate, and that is as of September 27th. The general availability of 8.4 is still about 2 months away as of November 21st, but you can prepare for 8.4 right now. Some of the ways you can do that is by familiarizing yourself with the new features, the upgrade path, and key dates that are on the calendar to make sure that you're ready. Now, the good news for you is that we have already summarized a lot of these features and highlighted what's going to be coming to PHP 8.4 in our own post. You can find it at laravel-news.com/php-8-4-0, or you can just find it in the show notes. But why not talk about them again real quick? And we're just going to briefly mention them. There is a request parse body function that allows parsing RFC 1867 multi-part requests and non-post HTTP requests. We're going to skim over that one because I haven't read anything about that, and I would be reading out of ignorance. Forget that one. You don't have to really forget it, but, come back to it if you like. The other one is class instantiation without extra parentheses. So this is nice. So if you have if you want to new up a class, typically what you would have had to do is you'd have to wrap that in parentheses before you could make any method on that class. No longer do you have to do that. You can just new up your class and then immediately arrow off that to call a method or to call an attribute, which is really, really cool. Nice little paper cut fix there. There is a couple things that are in RFC, which means that they're not necessarily 100% sure that they're coming in yet. But this is adding a deprecated attribute. Is that right or no?
No, this is just linking to the RFC describing those changes.
Thank you. Thank you. All these are for sure going in. Perfect. That makes a lot more sense. Adding a deprecated attribute. So you could add this to anything in any of your classes, and it would give a deprecated warning, which is pretty nice. Property hooks, which are really cool, and asymmetric property visibility, which is also really cool. So let's talk about that real quick. So property hooks, you can think of this, and we have talked about this on the show before, but if I'm trying to explain this in the easiest way possible, because this is a podcast about Laravel, if you've ever used an attribute or an accessor on a model, you have maybe like a new, you have a class called user, and you have something called name, right? Full name, something like that. And what you want to do is full name is going to return an attribute, attribute, that's right. And then you're going to, inside of there, you're going to return a new attribute, which has a get and a set method. So they both accept a parameter, and then you basically can modify what's going to be done when you get the method, or when you get that thing off of the class, or when you set that thing on the class. That is sort of the idea here for these property hooks, is that you can define inside of a single method, instead of having getters and setters, get first name, set first name, or get full name, set full name, you can just have inside of that a get and a set, and then you can just do whatever you want right on the method itself, which is pretty freaking awesome. So these property hooks are super cool. And then along with that, you have this asymmetric property visibility. And what this is really talking about is the fact that PHP has had the ability to control the visibility of object properties using like public or private or protected. But that control is always the same for both get and set operations, right? That's just how it was. And so with this, you can now, meaning that they were symmetric, right? They were the same.
Yeah.
But with this, it allows properties to have separate visibility, asymmetric, with separate visibility for read and write operations. And so this is sort of inspired, borrowed, if you will, from Swift. But this kind of goes along with the idea of property hooks, this asymmetric property visibility. Both of those, really, really cool stuff. Excited about that. Lazy objects, which I have not done a lot of reading into, so I'm not going to act like I know on that one. There's a new array find function, which you might be shocked to know did not exist until now, probably because we're all spoiled with Laravel's collections. And so there was not a native array find function, but there are now a few of them, right? So again, we have talked about this before. There's array find key, array any, and array all. If you look in the show notes, you can find references to where we've talked about that previously. I won't go back over that, but those are some of the new functions. Sorry, not functions. Some of them are functions, but those are the new features in PHP 8.4. And there's an upgrade document as well for the complete list of new features. The timeline, as we mentioned at the top of this one, is that general release is expected to be November 21st. So that should be really good. And as I said before, you can start looking at that right now. If you have Herd installed, you can download PHP 8.4 and start playing around with that on your own projects and updating your packages if you'd like to. Okay, that's PHP 8.4. Thanks, Paul Redmond, for writing that one up.
Nice. Version 5 of the official Laravel MongoDB integration is now available. This major update introduces breaking changes to better align the MongoDB integration with Laravel's conventions and behaviors, simplifying MongoDB usage for developers already familiar with Eloquent. So some of the new features coming into this release is the automatic aliasing of ID to _ID in MongoDB is now supported, eliminating the need for specifying protected primary key equals _ID in model classes, which simplifies your application code. It allows you to replace model arrow _ID with model arrow ID as you would with a Eloquent ID ordinarily. There is date handling announcements where all datetime interface objects, including Carbon, are now automatically converted to MongoDB's UTC datetime for both insert and update operations, and similarly, when retrieving data, MongoDB's UTC datetime is automatically converted back into Carbon dates with the default time zone. This change simplifies working with dates in MongoDB and reduces the need for custom Eloquent casts. Results are now returned as objects, as standard class objects instead of arrays, and the object properties can now be accessed using the arrow syntax rather than the array syntax. The collection property has been replaced by table for customizing the collection name in Eloquent models, aligning with Laravel's conventions. Several providers have been removed, and connection and logging updates. So the MongoDB Laravel connection has been replaced with a MongoDB connection, and query logging now uses MongoDB monitoring events. If you are using the Laravel MongoDB package and you are needing to upgrade, you can refer to the upgrade guide to handle breaking changes. We've got a few resources on Laravel MongoDB, getting started with it and things like that. If you haven't looked into it before, we'll have links to all of that, of course, in the show notes.
Very good. That wraps up the releases. Let's move on to the news. Well, if you like roll-ups, and what I mean by roll-ups is not like the type of like fruit roll-ups. Speaking of, Michael, did you have fruit roll-ups when you were growing up?
We did have fruit roll-ups,
You did have fruit roll-ups. And I feel like recently you had like some like Ultimate USA package where it came with like Mountain Dew and like fruit roll-ups and sort of craziness. Do you remember this? Do you know what I'm talking about? Am I making this up?
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Not recently. It was like a year ago, but yes, definitely.
It was a year ago. Yeah, it was a year ago. I'm sidetracked. Roll-ups, roundups. That's what we're talking about here, right? So, really, this podcast is a roundup of the news coming through your headphones. That's what this is. However, it's not everybody's cup of tea, right? Some people like video, some people, which, we provide video on this thing as well. But if you would rather read a text version of this, starting now, we are now going to have a monthly edition of the Laravel Roundup. At the beginning of each month, we're going to create a post that highlights all the latest news, jobs, and community-related items. This is going to be written up by Eric Barnes, our fearless leader himself. So let me give you a couple examples reading from this. And if you are not subscribed to the newsletter, this would be a great thing to subscribe to. Or if you're not on the Telegram channel, which if you happen to use Telegram, we have a Telegram channel you can subscribe to as well. Anytime a new thing is published, you'll get notified about it, including this Laravel Roundup. Here are some recent highlights. Laravel raises a $57 million Series A from Excel. We all remember that. Pinkery is now fully open source. Laravel Creator Spotlight Interview Series. PHP 8.4 RC1 is out. Laravel releases. PES 3 is released. And then here's some jobs that are available for people who are looking. Here's some tutorials that we've covered recently. Upcoming events, different packages that have been highlighted. All that good stuff, all that goodness rolled up, rounded up into one single blog post so you can stay up to date with the latest news, events, and happenings in the Laravel community. Thank you to Mr. Eric Barnes. You can look forward to that on the first of each month moving forward. Thanks, Eric.
That's fun. Another monthly occurrence is the Laravel Worldwide Meetup, which happened last week, the 24th of September. This particular edition featured my friend Marty Friedel talking about building maintainable websites with Statomic, and Max Brockman discussed building software in a team environment in his talk, reducing the cost of action, ideas for effective teams. The Laravel Worldwide Meetup, for those of you who don't know, is the official Laravel Meetup in the cloud where you can learn from familiar faces and new speakers. And these typically range in time from 9 a.m. Pacific Daylight, 10 a.m. MDT, 11 a.m. CDT, and 12 p.m. EDT. For people like me, it's usually somewhere in the middle of the night on the other side of the world. But these are recorded and they're available on YouTube. You can check them out at meetup.laravel.com. And definitely check those out and support the people that are, putting the talks together. They're often of a high quality, and because they're more regular, they're a bit longer as well than a typical conference talk. So definitely check them out. And if you are interested in speaking, reach out to the team at Vehicle. Margaret Tavares, I think, is one of the people over there that is running the Laravel Worldwide Meetup these days. So definitely reach out if you are interested in putting a talk together.
Absolutely. Speaking of talks, Eric had a talk recently with Tobias Petry. So who is Tobias Petry, you might ask yourself, and what is Eric doing talking to him? Well, the Creator Series, the Laravel Creator Series, is a recent sort of format that Eric has taken on, talking to a bunch of people in the community about things that they're working on or have worked on in the past. This specific one is talking to Tobias Petry and talking about his MySQL Explain tool. But in case you've been living under a rock for a while, Tobias Petry is the self-proclaimed database guy, helping people get better with MySQL and Postgres. He also happens to be from Germany and is an amateur chef, according to himself. So if I ever get over to Germany, I'm going to have some of his sauerkraut. It's going to be incredible. I'm part German. Did you know this?
I didn't know that.
I am part German.
How do I know this after all these
Sprechen Sie
years?
Deutsch. Sprechen Sie Deutsch.
I mean, that's not the only German,
Oh, I mean, believe me, it's like, I think I'm like maybe an eighth German.
Right.
Maybe. Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's an eighth, maybe. I don't think it's a
percentage.
fourth. It might be a fourth. I'm not sure. I think it's an eighth. And then Russian as well, and who knows? The melting pot, right? Swedish. Got some Swedish. Yeah. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Me and Tobias Petry, we're on good terms here. So anyway, he has this awesome tool called MySQL Explain, which we have covered on the show before, which is a visual explainer for your MySQL queries. So you can research slow queries performance problems on a simple visualization instead of trying to understand MySQL's odd cryptic sort of output. You can just paste it in there, and it will create this beautiful little chart that shows you exactly what it is. And I think even Aaron Francis basically was like, hey, MySQLexplain.com, I own this. Do you want it? And I think he took it. So anyway, Tobias on the show shares his insights about other projects he has, including StackBricks, which is a tool for managing different database versions, as well as his contributions to the Laravel debug bar. And he very generously offers a 10% off his Indexing Beyond the Basics book and video course with the coupon code of Laravel News. So if you didn't get a chance to watch that one, you can either listen to it on the Creator Series podcast, or you can look at it on YouTube as well under the Creator Series on the Laravel News YouTube channel. All right, on with the show.
Nice. Also in the Laravel Creator Series is an interview with Alfred Nutile, who's been a member of the Laravel community for a long time. Used to have a podcast way back when. It's kind of gone a bit quieter, I think, but his company is still definitely around the place and doing lots of things. And this particular episode, Alfred dives deep into the intersection of Laravel and the growing influence of large language models, LLMs, that are in development. With over a decade of experience, including introducing Laravel at Pfizer, Al shares how LLMs are shaping the future of programming and content creation, and they discuss how he leverages LLMs in his current work, his thoughts on the potential they unlock for developers, and what it means for the evolution of the Laravel ecosystem. So if you've kind of been a bit like me and going, yep, AI, LLMs, whatever else, it's just off there in the distance, not really seeing how it applies to you or when you'd use it or why you'd use it, what it means in the context of Laravel, definitely check out this interview with Alfred Nutile. We'll have links to that in the show notes.
Awesome stuff. Hey, folks, that wraps up news. We are now on to packages. So the first one we've got on the docket here is the Laravel config checker package. So this is by an author named Chris DiCarlo, not to be confused with Colin DiCarlo, a vehicle. Chris DiCarlo, although you'd be forgiven for misunderstanding the two. The config checker package scans your code base to verify if config keys are correctly defined in your config files. Now, why is this important? I'll tell you why it's important. On Laravel 11, you have the option to literally nuke every single config file that you want. You could just chuck them out the window. And the Laravel default installation defaults will be provided for you. And so sometimes it's possible for you to get some really funky stuff if you're only putting in the items that you think you need, or you could get misaligned, right? If you're not looking at the correct location, or you have a junior developer on the team and they don't know that it's supposed to be q.php, and then inside of q.php there is the thing called database. I don't know. The name it database is. I have no idea. I'm making up things here, but I would assume that something like this would catch this. So it scans your code base to verify if config keys are correctly defined in your config files to ensure that all configuration values referenced in the code actually exist. So this helps you to prevent missing or undefined configuration errors. And once installed, you can run PHP artisan config check, which scans your app and displays any errors in a table with information on the location and missing reference. So if in your code somewhere you referenced a config value and you never defined that config value, this is going to throw an error letting you know, hey, by the way, you should probably go define this thing where you said you were going to define it, because it's no longer here. You can think of it like a little bit of a PHP Stan add-on, if you will. Hey, this config value doesn't have any backing. There's nothing there. So you're going to want to go check that. And so, cool one there. Thanks to not Colin, but Chris DiCarlo for creating that one. And thanks, Eric, for writing that one up.
Excellent. Laravel LangCountry just launched version 4. If you are not familiar with the package, Laravel, this is from the package description. Laravel has a great localization functionality, but it is all based on the locale. The locale only refers to a language and not a country. This package adds the ability to localize based on the country. Why would you do this? Mainly because dates can be pronounced the same in a language, but formatted differently in different countries. The package also adds more convenience functions to get localized country names, currency symbols, and more. Version 4 now includes Carbon macros, so you can use the LangCountry formatting directly on your Carbon instances, and on most IDEs, they are also auto-completed for convenience. So things like birth date, numbers, words with days, these things are all localized based on country, irrespective of the language and things like that. If you've ever needed to do that kind of localization and you find that Laravel's localization functionality kind of lacks a bit of the nuance that you need in order to do that, and maybe this package is for you. So check it out. We'll have links to it in the show notes.
I do feel like it's really nice that a lot of these things ship with IDE completion, right? And so that's really convenient, and that's the story that we're hearing sort of across the board with like the VS Code, Laravel, first-party integration stuff. But sometimes even when you have those auto-completing things, it's possible to get them wrong. For example, that config checker we just talked about. We said, if you don't have PHP Stan, this would be a good alternative to that. But even PHP Stan misses stuff sometimes, and when it does, you need something to have your back that's going to be watching for those errors that are going to happen unexpectedly, and that's why you should be using Sentry. So Sentry helps you to quickly identify not only those issues where there are errors, but it gives you full stack traces, so you can see local variables in the stack where it happened for production errors, just like you would be used to seeing in your development environment. You can see the entire source code context within the frame, and then you can trace backwards using their breadcrumbs, which is insanely helpful. You also get all the context. Who was the logged in user? What email were they using? What was the payload they were sending through in the request? But not only does it help you identify errors, they also help you identify Laravel performance issues, as well as slow queries and full end-to-end distributed traces to see the exact poor performing API call and surface any related errors. So If you have not used Sentry before, as I asked you to at the beginning of the show, you should definitely check it out now. And you can use the code Laravel News right now, which will get you 2 months of Sentry free. No excuses. Go give it a try right now. Sentry.io. Thanks, Sentry, for sponsoring the show.
Thank you. Fetch PHP is a lightweight HTTP library inspired by JavaScript's fetch function. It brings the simplicity and flexibility of fetch to PHP HTTP requests and uses the Guzzle client behind the scenes, offering synchronous and asynchronous requests with an easy-to-use API. And whilst we know that Guzzle is king in terms of HTTP functionality in PHP at large, and we and the author of this, Paul Redmond, would use Laravel's HTTP client on most projects, the fetch PHP package is just downright fun to use when you want a no-frills fetch function. You just call fetch and you get a response. And you can call response JSON on it and get your data back in a JSON form, in a JSON decoded array. You can get the status text. You can get the response body as plain text. You can get it as a blob. You can get an array buffer. You can find out if there was a successful response. You can find out if it's informational or it's a redirection or a client error or a server error. There's even the ability to use the fetch async helper function as well. You can also pass Guzzle options to the fetch and fetch async functions for any advanced Guzzle features that you might need, like middleware or listeners or anything like that. But you can learn more about the package, get full installation instructions, and view the source code on GitHub. Links to all of those will be in the show notes.
Very cool. Okay, so you're writing a console command, and you've got a couple different pieces of input, but you really need to make sure that they're correct because this is a really important command. If you've wanted to validate these things before, the first thing you'd have to do is go run to the documentation because it's been forever since you've done this, and you have to remember how to do it. And there's a way to do it, but it's not super necessarily convenient or familiar, right? What is really familiar to most of us, however, is using the Laravel validation. We all know how that works. You have a set of input, you have a set of rules. We know what the rules are. We know what ones are available to us. We know the ones we have that are tried and true, including things like, hey, does this value exist in this database? Does this user ID exist? Things like that. Well, with this new command validator package by Andrea Marco Sartori, all of that is now super simple for you because you can now use all of the Laravel validation rules that you know and love with this package, along with any custom validation rules you want as well. So the way that this integrates into your application is by using the provided validates input trait, which will then include an abstract rules method. So you have to implement that rules method on your own, and the command signature looks like the following. You have this rules, which returns an array. Then you have, here's the input key that I'm looking for, fat arrow, here are the different validation rules that should apply to this particular type of input. It feels exactly like what you would think it would feel like if you were using a regular Laravel validation. It's also really nice that you can use a closure-based custom validation rule directly in your console command. So you don't have to create a brand new custom rule. You can literally just pass a closure. It'll pass the attribute as the value along with it, and then you can do anything you want to that to check to see if it is in fact valid. So when validation passes, you know that you're working with valid input. Your handle method can stay clean from manual validation checks. You don't have to do any of that in there. It will just automatically return any validation rules that have problems to the front end for your user or for yourself. Another neat use case in here is that the built-in validation rules will interact with the database if you need them to. Similar to what I said at the top, it can do that exists user's ID. Does this user ID actually exist already? I want to create a new API key for it. Does this user already exist? Of course, you could conditionally do that yourself, like in the handle method, like we said before, but this just makes it so much easier. So if you want to install this, you can find notes for that in the show notes. Require Cerberus/command-validator is all you have to do for Composer. Really simple. Require that provided trait, and away you go.
Amazing. That wraps the packages for this episode. We have two tutorials. The first up from Ash Allen is a deep dive into sessions in Laravel. It talks at a high level about what sessions are, how they work specifically in Laravel, and how you would work with them, including reading and writing data to the session, pushing data to an array, incrementing and decrementing values, removing data from sessions, checking if data exists, and flashing data to the session. It also talks about the different approaches to accessing and manipulating session data, whether using the session helper or the session facade or directly off the request class, and accounting for things like typos in session keys and session key clashes and unknown data types and so on. As with all of Ash's articles that he writes for Laravel News, great deal of detail, great deal of care, and a very deep dive. We don't just call that a deep dive for nothing. The second article that we have is from everybody's favorite human, Paul Redmond, talking about splitting log levels between standard out and standard error with Laravel. If you've ever wanted to log specific errors, you can use the level config to specify the minimum level to log. But if you want to send debug and info logs to a specific logger, then this may be an approach to take. And Paul goes through configuring Laravel to filter the log levels and how you might use that in a Docker context. If you're using Docker for shipping your production applications, we will have links to both tutorials for you to sink your teeth into in the show notes. But that is a wrap on everything for this week.
Yeah, I feel like on this last tutorial as well, this could be interesting in the case that you wanted to send your errors to maybe like some paper trail. Or like some monitoring service where you're going to be able to go look at those. So then the info ones and maybe the debug ones, maybe you just kind of keep those on the server local. You don't need to chuck all of those over there.
Yeah.
I know for us, on specifically paper trail, there'll be times where it's like, hey, you hit your log limit. It's like, what is all this stuff in here? It's like, this is just info and debug stuff. I don't actually care about most of this. Like the things that I really typically want in there is I want error stuff. And so instead of having to, pay that extra $5 every month because you hit your log limits, you could just pipe only the errors over there, leave the debug and the info stuff on the server itself, and you're fine. So it's really interesting. I love how Paul dives real deep into this stuff and figures out like, hey, how do I use the underlying classes to do these filtering log levels, and how can I utilize that to get just the pieces I want in the places I want. So thanks, Paul, for writing that one up.
Yeah.
Well, hey, folks, this was episode 224. October 1st is the date today. We really appreciate you coming and hanging out with us, watching us on the YouTubes if you happen to. I'm trying to remember. Hold on. 1 second. Andy Hinkle reached out to me and was like, hey, yes, I do watch you guys on YouTube. So he's the only person. He's the one person who watches us on YouTube every show. And if you happen to be one of those people as well, you should reach out to us on Twitter. Because we said, Michael, we did say, reach out to us on Twitter if you watch the show on YouTube.
So far, I'm podcast though.
Hey, doesn't matter. If people listen to this podcast, they should listen to our other podcast. I believe they do. So if you happen to be one of the YouTube watchers, hit us up. I'd love to hear from you. And with that, you can hit us up on Twitter at Jacob Bennett, at Laravel News, or at Michael Dorinda. Show notes for this episode at podcast.laravel-news.com/224. And if you liked our podcast, we'd really appreciate it if you'd rate it up in your podcatcher of choice. 5 stars would be absolutely incredible. And folks, until next time, this is Jake with Olipop saying, support your digestive health. Go get some classic grape, a new kind of soda. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
I hope.
Bye.